Turning to the 17th chapter of 1 Samuel. We'll begin there in just a moment. But I want you to be turning there, 1 Samuel 17. I appreciate Ry leading that song. I told him he inquired earlier in the week as to what I might be preaching on, and I told him, and he said, how about this song? And it really was a song that I think as the lesson goes forward this morning, I hope that as you hear and think about the words of the song, you will think about this lesson and about yours and my responsibility in reference to standing up for Jesus. Not only this song, but the song that we'll sing in just a moment as a song of invitation as well. And I hope that you'll put those things together. I want to reiterate, if I may, the things that Randy said as he opened our assembly this morning, how thankful he is that all of you have come to be with us. And we do have guests, and we're thankful for your presence. We want you to know how appreciative we are that you're here. I think it is right, as he said this morning, for us always to make sure that we are reminded of and that those who may be guests with us understand what we're trying to accomplish here. I used to say that we're trying to be a church like we find in the New Testament. That's not altogether true. As a matter of fact, most churches that you find in the New Testament struggled. They had problems. I think the better way to say that is that we want to be a church like Jesus wants us to be. That's who we want to be. We're going to struggle too. We have individuals who struggle. We may struggle collectively to some degree or another. But really what we're trying to be is what Jesus wants us to be. And I hope that we're trying to be that, and I hope that we're accomplishing that, and that's part of what we're going to talk about this morning. But that's who we want to be. So if you're a guest with us this morning and that's of some interest to you, maybe you say, well, I want to know more about that. I want to find out more about what you're doing. Ask us. I would love to talk to you. I'd love just to sit down and let's just open our Bibles. Let's talk about what it is that God expects from us. That's all I'm trying to accomplish in my life, to whatever degree I can, and I believe that's what we're trying to do here. But let's seek to accomplish what it is that God wants us to do. And if we can do that, then by His mercy and by His grace, I pray to God every day that that will be what God would want from me. And I want you to do the same. I'm confident that you will, and I'm confident as we study and work together that we can accomplish those things as God would have us do. This is a lesson that, as you're going to find out as I get into this lesson, and really as I close the lesson, is going to be kind of a lesson that kind of tags with what Brother Bob said last week as he talked about our theme this year. But I want us to look at that particularly as it relates to a story about David and Goliath. For the most part, the days when Saul reigned as the king of Israel were dark days. He had been a very presumptuous and a very rebellious type of king. And as a result, chapter 16 of 1 Samuel and verse 14 tells us that the Spirit of God departed from him. It's interesting to me that while the Spirit of God was with him, things seemed to be going well. That wasn't just common to the king of Israel, that was common to the people of Israel. And I'm going to tell you something, I think in very real principle, that's the way it is with us. When the Spirit of God, and when I'm talking about the disposition of our hearts that says, I'm going to listen to God and I'm going to obey God. I believe with all of my heart when it's that way with us, that our lives are pleasing, that it's what God wants. But when the Spirit of God, if you will, leaves us, and when we're not fully committed to that, I think those are the times when things go awry in our lives. But God was allowing, I think, the heathen Philistines to encroach deeper and deeper into Israel's territory. That's what we're really finding out here in 1 Samuel 17. The valley of Elah was about 15 miles southwest of Bethlehem. And it's the place where the armies of Israel and the Philistine armies would face off. They would face off between the two mountains. And what you have is what you very well know because you know the story. What you have is really David is he is really representing, I think, and Israel is representing the coward, and Goliath and the Philistines are representing the bully. So what you have in chapter 17, verse 3, the text tells us this: the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with a valley between them. And what happens in the next part of this story, I think, is probably the most famous, and I use that term in a very carnal kind of sense, If it's not the most famous, it's certainly one of the most familiar stories that we ever read about in Scripture. It is the ultimate underdog story. And I think from a human standpoint, just from a pure human standpoint, and even, so let's say, from a Hollywood standpoint, we like this. This is the story of a boy versus a man. This is a story about no way something's going to happen to, no way that happened. We're amazed as we read this story because here is really a bad guy who's 9 feet tall. His brass coat alone weighed 156 pounds. Now, I want you to think about that. His coat weighed more than some of you weigh. I wish I could say that, but that's not the case with me. But his coat weighed 156 pounds. He was a specimen to be reckoned with. You know, I try to think, who have I seen in my lifetime besides myself that would be this kind of specimen? And I'm just amazed, you know. And I think about this. I'll tell you who it is with me. So those of you who are older, who are sports fans, are going to remember this guy. This guy's name was Karl Malone. He used to play in the NBA. He was about 6'8", and he played at Louisiana Tech in college, and he played for the Utah Jazz. And I saw him one night. Matter of fact, I went to a game that he played, and I was on the floor, not on the actual playing floor, you understand, but I was on the floor in the arena, and he walked by me, and I looked at Karl Malone, and I thought, man, that's the strongest man I think I've ever seen in my life. He was huge. And it wasn't that he was 9 feet tall, but he was just cut. Everything about him looked like he could just take and just throw you down and make you like it, make you just do whatever he wanted you to do. And so when I think of Goliath, I think of a man who was 9 feet tall. The head of his spear weighed about 18 pounds. He is called a champion twice in 1 Samuel 17, and I tell you this, I'd want him on my team. I don't care if he'd ever played. You wanted him on your team because he was that kind of specimen. And so twice daily, Goliath would throw down this verbal gauntlet, that, if you will, that's found in 1 Samuel 17. And this is what he said. He stood and cried out to the armies of Israel, and he said to them, why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. If he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we'll be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And verse 11 tells us this. When Saul and all Israel heard these words, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. I'll tell you what happened to them. They're scared to death. Let's just state it like it is. When the king and everybody in Israel, it says, all Israel, all the armies of Israel, when they heard this man come out every day, twice a day, and make this verbal statement, they all got afraid. Well, 15 miles away from this valley, there was a young man named David. His brothers were fighting this battle. And David was at home shepherding his father's sheep. And David was dispatched by Jesse, who was his father, to take some bread and take other sustenance to his brothers and then report on their progress, come back to their father and report. So David left early one morning. He headed to the scene, and he found his brothers. He was talking to his brothers, and while he was talking, evidently, he heard Goliath make these comments to spew his challenge, as he always did. And once again, what apparently has happened, the men of Israel, verse 24 says, the men of Israel fled from him. And some exchanges take place between David and the men who are close to David. And we don't know everything about those exchanges, but we do see an exchange between David and his brother, because in verse 28, Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And he heard David speaking, and here's what Eliab said. And Eliab's anger was aroused against David, and he said, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. Now, I want you to look at this. The older brother looks at the younger brother. He said, why have you left those few sheep? Not why have you left your job. Why'd you leave those few sheep, David? You're not old enough to have many sheep. Why did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? He said, I know your pride and the insolence of your heart. And then he says, for you have come down here, look at this, you have come down to what? See the battle. You've come down to see it. You didn't come down to be a part of it. You didn't come down here to take part in it. You came down here to watch it. You came down here to see it. Well, first of all, it seems to me that Eliab is wrong on all counts. At least he's not right on the motives for David's coming. It may have been that David's father sent him, but David had another purpose in mind, especially when he heard what Goliath was saying. I want you to look at David's response. Verse 29. And David said, what have I done now? Imagine what Eliab is thinking. David responds, I think, the way any younger brother would respond and say, I keep hearing it every time, he does this at home, he does it when I'm away, he does it when I'm on a trip, he does it all the time. What have I done now? This seemed to be a pretty common exchange, you see. So Eliab says what he said, and Eliab may be thinking, you can come, it's all right for you to come, but I want you to stay out of the way. You're a young boy, just stay out of the way. Or he may have thought, he may have felt some guilt for not doing what he knew probably that David was going to do. I don't know this. This is pure speculation. But here's what I think may have happened. Eliab knows David's going to show up. And David's going to say, what's wrong with you people? Now, we don't know that that's what Eliab was thinking. But it seems to me that some of what Eliab is thinking is he probably knows what David is about to do. He knows David is not going to come down and listen to what Goliath says and just stand there and go back home and say, we got a problem down there, Dad. All the army of Israel's down there, Saul's down there, and nobody's standing up to Goliath. Nobody's standing up to this Philistine. And I think verse 29 and verse 30 is the key to this story. Now, I'm going to say this to you today. I think that this story it's a good story, first of all. It teaches well when you're talking to a 6-year-old. Makes good cutouts. Great story. It's great movie stuff here. But it's not about all that. I think these stories are given to us for a reason. Verse 30 tells us, then he turned from Eliab. Look at what verse 30 says. Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. I want you to look at that. Sometimes we get, he was talking to Eliab. He was talking to Eliab, but when Eliab didn't listen to him, he turned and started talking to everybody else. And here's what he said. Is there not a cause? Is there not a cause? Can't you just hear this young man going through the crowd, and he walks up to a group of men who are afraid and who are dismayed and who are depressed because every day for a long time this man continues to come out, and can't you hear David go, is there not a cause? You people are cowering, you're scared. Is there not a cause? How about you folks? How about you guys? Y'all over here, you're scared to death. You don't even look at him. Is there not a cause? Can't you see David doing that? And verse 31 says, when Saul heard what David had said, he sent for David. And I'm going to tell you, you know the rest of the story. This is not about what happened in the story. Every single person here this morning could tell us a story. David took the 5 stones, took one, slung it around, hit him in the head. Man died, cut his head, and that was all she wrote. And then Israel overtook the Philistines. We know the story. Why are we told this story? Romans 15:4 tells us that whatever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. Why are we being told this story? Why does God see fit through inspiration to include this in David's life? What's the point? Is it the point that David's in the Israelite Hall of Fame? He was a great king, he killed the giant. Is that the point for us? Well, I think it's a point. But I don't think it's the point. You ever, hopefully this never happened to you, you ever been given an eviction notice? You ever not paid your rent, paid your house payment, and done it for a period of time, and finally the sheriff or somebody comes to your house and says, I got bad news for you, it's time to go. You hadn't paid, time for you to go. Well, I don't think that that's what this story is. You're going, what does that have to do with this story? I don't think it's an eviction notice. I think it's a conviction notice. That's what this story is about. This story is about a conviction notice. This story is about the same thing Noah's story was about for us. It's not about the flood. Flood's important. Flood's a major part of the Bible story. Flood has a lot of stories to relate. But the point of Noah's story is that Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord, verse 8, chapter 6 of Genesis. That's the point of Noah's story for you and me. Noah found favor. That's what we're trying to do, find favor. That's the story of Joseph. There's a lot of things about Joseph's life. 12 chapters given to Joseph's life in the book of Genesis, more than anybody else. Why we told the story of Joseph and Potiphar's wife? I think the point of Joseph and Potiphar's wife is that Joseph said, why would I do this great wickedness and sin against God? That's the point for us. It's not about the story. It's not about made-for-TV movies. The point is that Joseph said, why would I do it and sin against God? The point for us is, when you're thinking about cheating on your husband or your wife, you better remember what Joseph said. That's the point. Are you going to sin against God? Are you going to do that great wickedness? That's the point of that story for us, it seems to me. It's about conviction to do the right thing. Or in David's life, as we're talking about later in his life, and he sees Bathsheba from 2 Samuel, the 12th chapter. And Nathan comes and he says, David, I got a story to tell you about a man who took, poor man's sheep. What's the story of that? Is the story of that we want to know what happened between David and Bathsheba? We know the story of David and Bathsheba. What's the point? The point is, when somebody comes to you and says, it's what you've done, you better pay attention to it. You better not blow it off like it's unimportant. You better be thankful that there's a Nathan in your life that comes to you and says, you got a problem and you better deal with it. You've sinned and you better deal with it. That seems to me the point. There's a point of conviction there. That's why we have the stories. Paul said, whatever things are written before were written for our learning, that we through patience and the comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. Let's think about the story and think about what it means to us. Well, here's the deal. Here's the conviction notice of this story. This is what I would like for you. When you think about David and Goliath, I understand that when you're teaching those young kids' classes and you're talking about a 9-foot-tall giant and a young boy came in and said, who is he to defy the armies of Israel? I understand that the point of that story for them is, here's a young boy and he's fighting against Goliath and he kills Goliath and God's with him. I understand all of that. But we can get past that. Here's the point. David said, is there not a cause? That's conviction. What David wanted the armies of Israel to answer is there not a cause? Are you going to stay down here and continue to watch what he does, and he's coming at you day and night, morning and evening, and he keeps making this challenge, and nobody's going to stand up to him? Is there not a cause? I want you to think about that with me today. There's been a cause since the Garden of Eden. Since the events of Genesis 3, there has been a cause. Since Genesis 3, there have been armies who would defy the armies of Israel. In essence, the Lord's cause in every generation. There are Goliaths in this town. There are Goliaths in this town who are challenging the people of God to stand up. There are Goliaths in this state. There are Goliaths in this state who are pushing to change laws. There are Goliaths in this state who are pushing to do different things. There are Goliaths in this nation who are pushing the people of God. There are Goliaths in this world who are pushing the armies of Israel, so to speak. And there may be people in this church who are Goliaths, who are fighting against the cause, who belittle and mock, who say, we don't need to fight. We don't need to pursue the cause. The question for us isn't, is there a cause? The question for us is how important is the cause? We all know there's a cause. Is there not a cause? Yes, Kenny, there's a cause. Here's my question. How important is the cause? In Jeremiah 6, Jeremiah would say about the prophets and the priest. He said, the prophets and the priest keep telling the people, peace, peace. And Jeremiah says, and the people look at what they're saying, and they don't see peace. What do they see? They see the armies of Babylon coming in, ready to destroy them and destroy the city. That was going to happen very soon after Jeremiah spoke these words. So that when Jeremiah speaks the words found in Lamentations, the first chapter in verse 12, when the city has been destroyed, he says, is it nothing to you who pass by? In other words, what do you say now about it? Is what's going on here, is it just nothing to you? Those people of Israel saw the cause. They'd seen the northern kingdom already taken into captivity. They know they're about to be taken into captivity. Babylon had already come against them twice, and were coming a third time to take the city of Jerusalem, the very capital, the very essence of who they were. And Jeremiah says, is it nothing? Is it nothing to those of you who pass by? Jesus' statement about the cause in his words in the New Testament are found in Matthew 6. Seek ye first the kingdom. What Jesus is saying is, do you not see the cause? Do you understand the cause? And does the cause manifest itself in the point that you're going to put that first in your life? And do you feel like you're fighting for the Lord's cause? I feel this way myself. I feel like I'm fighting for the Lord's cause every time I stand in this pulpit. Man, I'll be honest with you. I feel like, this is my way. This is one way you've granted me to say what I want to say about the Lord's cause. This is the easy part, folks. This piece of cake. This is the easiest part for you. It's easy. Coming here and sitting here, this is easy. This is what most of you have done all your life. This easy part. I'm asking you today, what are you doing for the cause? Is this what you're doing for the cause? Is coming here, assembling on the first day of the week, is that what you're doing for the cause? That's an important part of the cause. That's a huge part of the cause. I'm not against that at all. I'm actually for it. I'm for it all the way. If you weren't here, I'd be discouraged. I would be talking with you. I'd be pursuing. I'd be asking, why is it that you're not coming? Why is it that you're not assembling? That's part of the cause, but that ain't all the cause. Excuse my language. That ain't all the cause. I want to make a suggestion, if I may. I want to suggest that today, maybe today, maybe later this week, I want to suggest this. I want you to get you a pen, and I want you to get you some paper, and I want you to write out, what are you doing for the cause? Write it out. Sit down with a piece of paper and a pen, and I want you to write out, here's what I'm doing for the cause. And when you finish writing out what it is that you're doing, I want you to look at it. I'm going to do the same. And then I want you to ask this question after you write that out. How important is the cause to you? Here's the other question. David said, let no man's heart fail. Can you imagine a boy looking at a 9-foot man and saying, Who are you to defy the army of the living God? May I suggest this, folks? It takes courage, and it takes faith, and it takes confidence to fight for the cause of God. A lot of things involved in a cause. We hear about this cause and that cause, and if you just think about causes, it takes a lot to fight for a cause. There's a lot to it. And many times, people who may at first think about fighting for a cause, they may cower because of fear or shame. And I just want to suggest to us this morning that we cannot be afraid to plan. We cannot be afraid to evaluate. We cannot be afraid to work and to execute and to ask ourselves what is it about what we're doing that is for the cause? Our responsibility is to always abound. That's the responsibility. That's the point. That's why I so much appreciated Brother Griffin last week. He's talking about this work. And listen, we're going to talk about it all year. We're going to talk, but the cause is in this verse. The cause is the work of the Lord. That's the cause. And the hard part is always abounding. That's the hard part. You see, the cause is the work. The always abounding is the heart. And David, in his story, said, don't let your heart fail. You look at David's determination and his spirit. I'm not going to take the time to read it, but verse 34 through 37 talks about his determination and his spirit, and that's what drove him to do what he did. And I'm going to suggest to you today, folks, I realize that God doesn't work in our lives in the very same way He worked in David's life. I'm not suggesting that if somebody's evil and we go out and stand before Him that God's going to treat it just the same way. I understand that. But what is it that the story is really telling us today in 2015? I think it's telling us that God will be with us. But we've got to always be abounding in the work of the Lord. And we can't let our heart fail us. We've got to be given to doing the work of the Lord. That's why I think what we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to sing. We're going to spend a good portion of our time tonight talking about songs that have to do with to the work. To the work. We are servants of God. I'm glad we're doing that tonight because I think it speaks directly to what we're trying to accomplish, not just this year, while we're going to concentrate and think about it, and while we're going to preach lessons about it, we're going to talk about it, we're going to hopefully talk to our friends about it, but the essence of our life is doing this for the rest of our lives. So I'm going to suggest to all of us that we have no failed hearts here. Nobody's going to cower. Nobody's going to become discouraged. Nobody's going to get down, but we're going to be up. We're going to have good hearts, and we're going to be courageous because there is a cause. And the cause is becoming more apparent every single day. More apparent. And you know what that is. So I want you to think seriously today about these two phrases. Is there not a cause? And let no man's heart fail. Why the story of David and Goliath? Because He wants us to learn those valuable lessons. I want you to imagine with me for a moment if all of us were of the mindset to make the cause of God number one in our lives. If every single one of us determined right now, I'm going to make the cause number one. And I'm not going to wait on the church to figure out what it is that I ought to be doing. I'm going to do what I ought to do. I know what I ought to be doing. That's what I'm going to do. Imagine if every single one of us did that. And then imagine if after having made that determination that I'm going to make His cause number one in my life, imagine if we never lost heart. Imagine if we stayed at the top of that. Imagine if we stayed the course, if we don't ever quit, if we're determined to make a difference and to defeat the armies of Satan. Imagine what would happen. This church can do that. Not by itself. Not by itself. Matter of fact, by itself will do nothing. But this church, with the help of the leader of the army of God, can do that. That's why I get excited about it. Because I think that as I talk to you, I think we're starting to get that better. I think so. I may be wrong. I don't want to be wrong about it. But that's why it excites me. Because there's a cause. And I believe we are of a mind that says, I am not going to lose heart. We're going to defeat Satan. I'm going to defeat him personally, and I want us to defeat him collectively. We can do that together with his help. And I pray that's what we'll do. Well, we're going to sing an invitation song that has a lot to do with fighting and holding up the banner of the cross. And so as we sing this song, I want you to ask yourself, am I doing that? Can I do that better? Will I do that better? And is the cause that important to me? I pray that it will be. Folks, we can make a bigger difference for the cause if we choose to. And I pray that we'll do that. It may be that you're here this morning and you need to decide for yourself first what you're going to do. You need to decide, I'm going to serve God. I'm going to put the cause first in my life. That's what it's all about. There's nothing else really that important in your life. Not eternally. I can promise you that. We want to help you make the decision. We'd love to help you and assist you to do that. I say this all the time, but I got nothing for you myself. I can't do anything for you. The elders here, they can't do anything for you. The church can't do anything for you, but God can. Son can. And His Son will if you will respond to Him. We want to help you do that if you'd come as we stand and as we sing.